Once upon a time, in a small village nestled beside a winding river, there lived a kind merchant. He wasn't just any merchant, he was a man who worked very hard every single day. His best friend and helper was his trusty donkey. This donkey was special, with long, soft ears and big, curious eyes that seemed to notice everything. Together, they made a great team, traveling from their quiet village to the busy market in the next town over. The merchant would sell his goods, and the donkey would help carry them, always steady on his 4 hooves. They had been on this journey many, many times before, and knew the path like the back of their own hands. One bright and sunny morning, just as the birds began to sing their morning songs, the merchant woke up with a plan. Today was market day. He went to his storeroom and brought out 2 very large, very heavy bags filled to the brim with salt. Salt was a precious thing back then, and he knew it would sell well at the market. He carefully placed one heavy bag on the left side of the donkey's back and the other heavy bag on the right side. The donkey stood patiently, feeling the weight settle on him. It was a lot to carry, but he was a strong donkey, and he was ready for the day's adventure with his friend. With the sun climbing higher into the big blue sky, the merchant and his donkey set off on their familiar path. The road was dusty and the air was warm, but they didn't mind. They walked along, listening to the sounds of the countryside around them, the buzzing of bees and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. The merchant hummed a happy tune, thinking about the friends he would see at the market. The donkey walked behind him, his hooves making a soft thump, thump, thump sound on the dirt road. The bags of salt felt heavy, but it was a familiar weight, a reminder of the important job they had to do together. Their journey was a peaceful one, but the path ahead held a little challenge. To get to the market, they had to cross a shallow river. The water was cool and clear, and usually they could walk right through it without any trouble at all. The donkey had crossed this river many times and knew just where to step to keep his feet steady on the smooth river stones. The merchant would hold on to the donkey's rope, guiding him gently to the other side. They were getting closer and closer to the riverbank, the sound of the flowing water growing louder, promising a refreshing moment on their long, warm walk to the bustling market. As they reached the edge of the river, the merchant led the donkey into the cool, sparkling water. The donkey carefully placed one hoof in front of the other, feeling the smooth, slippery stones beneath him. He was being very cautious, just like always. But on this particular day, one of the river stones was a little more slippery than the others. The donkey's hoof slid out from under him, and with a big splash, he stumbled and fell right into the river. The water swirled all around him, soaking his fur and, more importantly, soaking the 2 big bags of salt he was carrying on his back. It was a complete and total surprise for both of them. The kind merchant quickly rushed to his donkey's side, helping him get back onto his feet. "Are you all right, my friend?" he asked, patting the donkey's wet back gently. The donkey shook himself, sending droplets of water flying everywhere. As he stood up, he noticed something very strange. The bags on his back felt different. They didn't feel nearly as heavy as they had just a few moments before. He wiggled his ears in confusion. What had happened? The load, which had been so burdensome, now felt wonderfully light. He took a step, and then another, and found walking was suddenly much, much easier than before. Of course, you and I know what happened, don't we? Salt dissolves in water. When the bags of salt fell into the river, the water rushed in and washed much of the salt away. The little salt crystals simply melted into the river's flow, disappearing from the bags. The donkey didn't understand the science, but he understood the result perfectly. His heavy, heavy burden had become a light, light load, all because of that little tumble in the water. This was a fantastic discovery. He felt so much better, and the rest of the walk to the market seemed like no trouble at all. As they continued their journey, the donkey couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. A fall in the river made his work easier. A little voice in his head started to whisper a clever but very tricky idea. He thought about how hard he usually had to work, carrying those heavy loads all the way to town under the hot sun. What if he could make his load lighter every single time they crossed the river? A mischievous sparkle appeared in the donkey's big brown eyes. He had learned something new today, and he was already planning how he could use this new knowledge for himself on their next trip. A few days later, it was time to go to the market again. The merchant, just like before, brought out 2 big, heavy bags of salt and carefully loaded them onto the donkey's back. The donkey stood still, feeling the familiar weight press down on him. But this time he wasn't worried about the heavy load. He was actually feeling a little bit excited. He remembered the last trip and the wonderful feeling of his burden becoming lighter. He had a secret plan, a tricky little idea that he was eager to try out as soon as they reached the river. He trotted along behind the merchant, seeming like the same obedient donkey, but inside, his mind was buzzing with his scheme. They walked along the same dusty path, and soon they could hear the familiar sound of the flowing river up ahead. The donkey's heart began to beat a little faster. This was his chance. As the merchant led him toward the water, the donkey prepared himself. He remembered exactly where he had slipped last time. When they reached the middle of the river, instead of walking carefully, the donkey pretended to stumble. He let his knees buckle, and with a loud kersplosh, he deliberately fell right into the cool water. He made sure the bags of salt were completely submerged, just like they had been before. The merchant sighed and helped his donkey up once more. "Oh dear, you seem to be a bit clumsy these days," he said. But as he looked at the donkey, he noticed something. The donkey didn't look surprised or scared this time. In fact, the merchant thought he saw a sly look in the animal's eyes. As they got to the other side of the river, the donkey pranced about, feeling happy and light. The merchant, however, was a very clever man. He had been working with this donkey for many, many years. He knew his friend very well, and he started to suspect that this second fall might not have been an accident at all. The merchant didn't say anything, but he watched his donkey closely for the rest of the day. He saw how easily the donkey walked now that the salt had washed away again. He thought about it all the way to the market and all the way back home. An accident can happen once, but for it to happen in the exact same spot in the exact same way, that seemed a little too convenient. The merchant realized his tricky donkey was trying to fool him to get out of doing his work. A gentle smile formed on the merchant's face. He decided that his clever friend needed to be taught a little lesson. The next market day arrived, and the donkey was ready to play his trick again. He watched as the merchant came out of the storeroom, this time carrying 2 bags that looked even bigger and fluffier than the salt bags. The donkey didn't know what was inside, but they looked just as heavy. The merchant loaded them onto his back, and the donkey felt their weight. He thought to himself, "It doesn't matter how heavy they are now. Soon we will get to the river, and I will make them light again." He started on the journey, feeling very proud of his cleverness and eagerly awaiting his chance to take another dip in the river. As they approached the riverbank, the donkey could hardly contain his excitement. He was ready to perform his trick one more time. He walked into the water, and just as he had planned, he took a big, dramatic tumble right into the middle of the stream. Splash! He lay there for a moment, letting the water soak into the big bags on his back, expecting them to become magically lighter. The merchant stood on the bank, watching quietly with his arms crossed. He wasn't rushing to help this time. He just waited, a calm and knowing expression on his face, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen next. But a very big surprise was waiting for the tricky donkey. When he tried to stand up, he couldn't. Instead of getting lighter, the bags on his back had become incredibly heavy, heavier than anything he had ever carried before. He struggled and strained, but the load was like an anchor pinning him down in the water. The bags hadn't been filled with salt this time. The clever merchant had filled them with sponges. And as we all know, sponges don't dissolve in water, they soak it all up, becoming many, many times heavier. The donkey finally understood he had been outsmarted. The merchant waded into the river and helped his struggling donkey to the shore. The poor animal could barely walk under the weight of the waterlogged sponges. As they slowly and painfully made their way to the market, the merchant spoke to his friend in a gentle voice. "You see," he said, A trick might work once or even twice, but you cannot fool everyone all the time. Honesty and hard work are always the better path. The donkey listened, and from that day on he never tried to trick the merchant again. He had learned his lesson. Trying to cheat your way out of work can often lead to a much heavier burden in the end.